Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new to my channel, hi, how are you guys doing? So as you know, February 1st through March 1st is the month of Black History Month, and I haven't really talked much on my channel about African American cases, so that's what I'm going to be covering today. And a big part of Black History Month was, it really isn't always about Martin Luther King Jr., but there was also other forms of racism that happened in the South. So today I'm going to be talking about the 16th Baptist Street church bombing. And have you ever heard about this incident? Because I personally found out about it in the 5th grade, and to this day it's still rarely talked about, and some people don't even know about the incident, which is pretty awful to know about. So the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, it was a terrorist attack in Birmingham, Alabama on September 15th of 1963 in the predominantly African American street of 16th Street. And it's actually considered a terrorist attack because it was performed on the church by the Ku Klux Klan. And the Ku Klux Klan was created after the end of the Civil War. And it was done to suppress and victimize newly freed slaves in 1865. Slavery was actually abolished after the end of the Civil War, and it was announced by Abraham Lincoln that slavery was done and over with, and every single former slave was given rights. Well, the Ku Klux Klan, they created themselves as a group of white supremacists to suppress and victimize the former slaves. So by 1870, the Ku Klux Klan, which is abbreviated as the KKK, it extended its way into every single southern state, and even becoming a beacon for the white Southern resistance to the Reconstruction era policies to establish political and economic equality for African Americans. Many years after the Ku Klux Klan was created, the Klan started to decline. It wasn't very popular anymore. So in the early 1900s, white Protestant groups, they started trying to revive, so to speak, the Ku Klux Klan. And the Klan eventually turned from being just against blacks to against, like several groups of people. And the Klan started building wooden crosses and burning them, along with staging multiple forms of marches and rallies to invite whites to join their Klan, especially white males. So the KKK, they didn't just hate African Americans, but they also hated immigrants, Catholics, Jews, and organized labor. They basically hated anyone who wasn't a white Christian. And it's kind of odd because Christians are supposed to be like loving and caring, and they just love everybody like the good Lord intended. So I don't really classify anyone who's in the KKK as a Christian. And like I mentioned earlier, the KKK was founded in 1865, and people who actually founded it were former Confederate soldiers. And I'm assuming this could have possibly have been done to being pissed off about losing the war. And have you ever noticed that most racists, they're always old white people? Like, what I'm talking about? People who are against blacks are always like the old white people. Like, is that just me that's found that out? It's so weird. So the KKK was actually founded in Pulaski, Tennessee. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Pulaski, Tennessee, one of the prior states of the Confederate United States. So in 1867, local branches of the Ku Klux Klan, they actually met up and established the quote-unquote invisible empire of the South. And I'm saying quote-unquote because that's literally what they called it. I'm not calling it that. That's what it was called. And this was a giant Klan that the KKK had created. And they eventually ended up electing a former Confederate general named Nathan Bedford Forrest as the first Grand Wizard of the Klan. Now, when I found out that the leaders were called the Grand Wizards, I thought right away that I was like, that's the stupidest name I've ever heard of. But then again, we're talking about the KKK, and the KKK is a very hateful and stupid group. So I guess it makes sense that they have a stupid name for the leaders. I don't know. Let me know your comments down below, because personally, I hate the KKK, and I think it's hilarious that they have a stupid name like that for a bunch of stupid people. So after Abraham Lincoln was shot in 1865, Andrew Johnson, he was elected president from 1865 until 1869. And that's not to be confused with the President Andrew Jackson. He was back in like the 1830s or 40s, so he was a different president. So Andrew Johnson, he had Congress pass the Reconstruction Act. And this also created the 14th Amendment that the South was required to obey, and the Southerners did not like this at all. This made them so mad. So the 14th Amendment, it actually allowed equal protection to allow equal rights to African Americans in the Constitution. So after 1867 and slavery was fully abolished, African American participation in society just skyrocketed. It went through the roof. And I mean, African Americans were slaves, and when slavery was abolished and it was announced that it was like the war was over, African Americans were freed, and everyone started doing every single African American started going and doing everything they could, doing things that they couldn't do before, and going places that they couldn't go to before. And as you can probably imagine, the Ku Klux Klan found out about this, and they were pissed. So they were like, the African Americans that used to be slaves now have rights and can go places? The horror, right? Oh my god. So the KKK, they decided they were going to do what they could to protect their color in a way. That's literally what they wanted to do. They wanted to protect their color. So they started finding a way to restore white supremacy in the South again. So even African Americans, they started being able to work in the House of Representatives. So this was when the KKK took it upon themselves to start targeting people who wanted to work in the House of Representatives. And it turns out by 1870, the KKK had actually spread their branches out to every single southern state again to help them gain power like it once was. And the U.S. Congress, they tried to do whatever they could to stop it before it got worse. But they just passed an act called the Ku Klux Klan Act that allowed them to help crush the KKK's control in the South. But by 1876, luckily the entire South was back under Democratic control. But unfortunately, this did not last because the KKK started to rise again in Atlanta, Georgia in 1915. In 1896, Southern legislators and governors, they created the Jim Crow laws. And Jim Crow was actually a derogatory and racist term to call African Americans. So I can understand why there was a lot of controversy over these laws and why people were so pissed. I would be pissed too. So once African Americans were freed from slavery, Congress had put out a law that there needed to be education for the children of African Americans. So by law, most southern states, they had to create separate schools for African Americans under the quoted separate but equal law. So now we're going to be talking about what life was like in Birmingham, Alabama in the 1960s. So we're moving from the 1870s, 1880s, and we're moving towards in the 1960s. And I'm sure you can think about this time, like life in Birmingham, Alabama in the 1960s was not good at all. It was horrible. It was not a good place for them to live at the time. And the city of Alabama was actually founded in 1871. So it was founded after the Civil War had ended and slavery was abolished. So, like I said, it was founded in 1871, but by the 1960s, it had become and was considered the most racist city in the United States. The racist city in the United States. And it was considered one of the most segregated cities in the entire country. The governor of Alabama at the time was a huge supporter of segregation. He loved the separate but equal laws. So he even allowed Birmingham to become one of the strongest and violent groups of the KKK, which, remember, the KKK had gone back down, but it started to rise again, and the governor at the time was like, oh yes, let the KKK control again. So I'm sure everyone knows about Martin Luther King Jr. and how he had actually been arrested in Birmingham, Alabama. And while he was in jail, he actually started writing a very famous letter, and the letter was called The Letter from Birmingham Jail, while he was in prison. So that was back in 1963. And 1963 started being known as a time that was very crucial for African Americans because they started protesting against the way that they were treated. And this ended up being called the Project C. And a lot of people thought Project C meant Project C for color, but it's actually C for confrontation. And protests for this actually began on April 3rd of 1963, and it was a nonviolent protest that began to boycott the all-white locations in the southern states. And they wanted them to either be integrated or to be shut down. That was their only choices that they wanted, which I can understand. Well, there was a very furious police chief in Birmingham, Alabama, who was famous for his use of brutality against the African American population. And he even used brutality against people who protested with African Americans who weren't even African American. So, can you guess who this guy was? I wanted you to guess down below. And if you answered Bull Connor, you are correct. It is Bull freaking Connor. So now I'm going to be talking about Bull Connor and how grotesque of a man this guy was. He was disgusting. Whoa. So his real name was Theophilus. I'm laughing because like it's a terrible name for a terrible person. And his name was Theophilus Eugene Connor. And he went by the name Bull because of how strict he was and how hard-headed he was. And he was just very tough on the state of Alabama. And he was an American politician who was also the commissioner of the public safety for the city of Birmingham, Alabama, which I consider disgusting considering who he was. Oof. And he was also a member of the Democratic Party, and he was very, very, very strongly opposed to the civil rights movement. And he wanted to do whatever it took to put it to an end. And because he was in charge of the city of Birmingham, he also had complete control over the police department and the fire department. Like, who put this guy in charge? Ugh. So Bull was a very powerful guy, and he used that power to install fear into the lives of the African American citizens. And on May 2nd of 1963, this was not long after the bombing had occurred, several youths and Christian students, they had walked out of the school to go to the mayor of Birmingham's office and try to discuss a better way to install safety in black students. They just didn't feel safe in their school. And unfortunately, Bull Connors, of course he heard about this, and under his direct orders, the fire department, he had told the fire department to use the most powerful hoses that they could find and hose down these children. And I'm talking about like they went flying across the roads like several yards, several feet. They ended up getting scraped up on their back, raw skin just hanging off, muscles showing. And he's doing this to little kids. He even went so far as to even using police dogs to attack the children and maul them. Like, what kind of... I'm at a loss for words of how disgusting this man truly was. So, many of these protests, they actually took place in Birmingham, Alabama, on the steps of the 16th Street Baptist Church. And I do believe a majority of the people who went to this church were predominantly African American, if not everybody going there. And this location was a very popular meeting place as well for civil rights organizers, including Martin Luther King Jr. himself, who would go there and do speeches and help show his support for the African American community. And as you know, a church is a place where, you know, everyone's supposed to be feeling safe and close to God. But on September 15th of 1963, they were a lot closer to hell than they were to heaven. The KKK, they eventually caught wind of these protests, and that the church was where these protests would happen the most. So, of course, when they found out about it, they wanted to put a stop to it right away. So they started making up a plan. And they eventually started calling in bomb threats to disrupt not only the church services, but also the civil rights meetings. And at 10:22 in the morning of September 16th, of 1963, there were around 200 people attending church services there at the church. And there was the children, and they were attending the Sunday school services over there as well. And without any knowledge of the citizens there at the church, out of nowhere, a freaking bomb went off, and it shook the church to its core. So there was more, like when a bomb went off, it was spraying mortar and bricks just everywhere towards the front of the church. And because of the amount of heavy damage, the walls actually, they started just caving in and starting to collapse on the citizens inside of the church who were just trying to go there and praise the Lord. And they were just horrified, and then panic began to set in. And so everyone who could started to panic and just scramble out of the church as fast as they could. Luckily, most of the parishioners were able to get out of the church with little to no injuries. Thank God for that. They literally had God on their side. But unfortunately, the most damage to the church was done in the bathroom, where several young girls who were just minding their own business, using the bathroom, doing what girls do, fixing their makeup, fixing their hair, just doing what they needed to do. They were in there when the bomb went off. And the bathroom was originally where several deaths had actually occurred, which the bathroom wasn't on the same level as the church pews and where the priests were and the pastors and everything. It was down in the basement. So when the bomb went off and everything was cleared up, people went searching for their loved ones. And that's when they had found the bodies of 4 young girls in the basement bathroom. There was 14-year-old Addie Mae Collins, 14-year-old Cynthia Wesley, 14-year-old Carol Robertson, and 11-year-old Denise McNair. There was also a 5th girl who was in there as well. And luckily she survived, but she needed to get surgery to remove her right eye, so she was blind in her right eye. And on top of all the deaths of the girls, more than 20 other people were injured from the blast. After the bombing had occurred, rightfully, the African Americans were pissed, and they started to gather in front of the church, and they were protesting what had happened because they were just furious that the bombing had occurred and took the lives of 4 innocent young ladies. And once Governor Wallace, he found out about this, he was the governor of the state of Georgia, he was furious. So he quickly got a hold of police departments, and he sent out police to break up the protesters. And 2 African American men who were there protesting ended up being shot and killed by police. At the funerals of the girls, Martin Luther King Jr., he actually had shown up, and he started to speak about the 3 of them, which is absolutely incredible to have been able to listen to, even though it was at a funeral. I wish I could have been able to be alive to hear Martin Luther King Jr. speak myself. You know, it's just what an honor, but it was such a terrible, terrible thing that had happened. It's just horrible. So the bombing case, it went cold after the year of 1963. And there was no leads as to what could have happened and who could have done this until the year of 1977, when the investigation was then reopened by the police in Birmingham. And the police in Birmingham, they actually had made an arrest that year of 1977 of a local known Ku Klux Klan leader. And he started talking to them, the leader, and this allowed the police to start looking into whether or not the KKK was involved. And after years, and this was years of heavy research, the FBI had announced in May of 2000, that the bombings were done, in fact, by the 4 Ku Klux Klan members named Thomas Edwin Blanton Jr., Bobby Frank Cherry, Robert E. Chambliss, and Herman Frank Cash. Once this was discovered, all 4 of them were arrested, and they were sent to prison for the rest of their lives. The bombing of 16th Baptist Church, the 16th Street Baptist Church, was actually referenced in a book called The Watsons Go to Birmingham. And it's actually a movie as well. Watsons Go to Birmingham is actually one of my favorite books that I read as a child. So if you haven't read that book, I highly recommend going and reading it. It's very crucial to this case, very crucial to what happened to the civil rights movement. It's just a very good book in general. So it's also a movie, and I believe you can actually watch the movie. I think it's on Tubi. it's either on Tubi or Amazon Prime. Don't quote me on that. So in the book, shortly after 10-year-old Kenny and his 13-year-old brother Byron, they had gone to the river, and they were looking for a woolpoo, which was the southerner Anne's way of saying whirlpool, but it was woolpoo. And a bomb had gone off at the 16th Street Baptist Church, where the little sister, her name was Joetta, but they called her Joey. She was at Sunday school there. And Kenny, he immediately had gone to the church to search for Joey. And he had seen the bodies of the 4 girls that were said to have passed away in real life. And he thought that one of them was actually Joey because of the shoes that the girl had been wearing was very similar to what Joey was wearing. So he began to grieve for the loss of who he thought was his sister. So he started to grieve, and he had gone home and was just stunned to see that Joey was there, actually alive. And I highly, highly recommend reading the book, watching the movie. It is very good, and it's very informative about the civil rights movement and the bombing at the church. And I remember being a teenager in high school, and I had gone to school one day. Like, I'd gone home from school one day, and this is actually an incident that, like, really shook me to the core. And I'd gone home from school, and there was a flyer in our driveway. And I looked at the flyer because there's one in our driveway, and there was one on our mailbox thing. And I looked around, and we had people across the street from us who were Dominican Republic, and they didn't have a flyer on their driveway or in their mailbox at all. Instead, there was an X right by their house. So I looked at the flyer, and it was actually an invitation to join the Ku Klux Klan because they needed new members in our area. Well, my mom found out about this, and she was pissed because we are from, like I said, we're from Maryland, and there are little branches of the KKK in there, but you don't straight up go to someone's house and ask them to join. Like, that's so uncomfortable. Like, my mom was furious. She said that she was going to try to get hold of the police, and she actually took the flyer and stuck it in the fireplace and burned it. So, yeah, that's what happened there. So, as always, I always allow my personal thoughts and opinions at the ends of my cases. And I'm going to be doing that again today as well. So my personal thoughts on this case is that I 100% believe that racism is filthy and disgusting and horrible, and it should never exist. And if you are a racist person, you're disgusting and horrible. And as you can see, I'm not a person of color, and I've never experienced racism myself like people who are African Americans and people of color have experienced. And I sympathize for those who have actually experienced racism or any kind of prejudice because it's just something I cannot understand myself. But if I were to witness someone else having it happen to them, I would fully 100% stand up for them. That's the kind of person that I am. I don't tolerate bullying. I don't tolerate harassment. And to me, I think that being racist and prejudice against people for their skin color or like their gender or anything like that, I find it disgusting. And I will stand up for the people who are being bullied anytime, any day. And that is just how I am. So, as always, please like this video, please comment your thoughts, and please share this video with your friends, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the notifications button so you never miss a post that I will upload. And I post on Tuesdays and Fridays. So my Tuesdays videos are True Crime Tuesdays, and Fridays is Crimes Through the Times. So I try to do with Crimes Through the Times older cases, usually from the 70s, 60s, and prior. And for my True Crime Tuesdays, I try to do more active cases from like the 80s, 90s onwards. So if you're interested in any of those type of videos, I highly recommend subscribing. Turn on that notification button and let me know down below as well any type of cases you would like me to cover. I will cover as many cases as you would like me to do. So that is going to be everything for me today. And I do apologize if this was a very heavy case. It was very frustrating for me myself reading about Bull Connors and how filthy of a person he was, reading about like what had happened to the KKK, how they left to get power, how these poor girls just died. It was just so much for information that I took in, and it made me almost sick to my stomach. Like I literally couldn't eat for the rest of the day, like until like 7 or 8. And I'm laughing because I said the rest of the day, but I actually ate later in the day. And it just like frustrated me that people are like this and people allow this to happen. And if you were a victim of any type of prejudice, racism, and anyone who said any type of hateful comments to you, from the bottom of my heart, I apologize that you had to go through that, and I'm so sorry for your family if they had to go through that. And like I said, it's something that still occurs today. Racism is still very strong today. The KKK is still active today. They're not as active as they were back in the 60s. Thank God. They're not lynching people and bombing people anymore. Thank God for that. But they're still relevant to today's society, as I told you about the story that happened to me. And as you all know, you are safe in my comment section, and if there are any type of hateful comments towards me, my case, my dog, or anything like that, I will delete them 100%. This is supposed to be a safe space, and I don't tolerate bullying even in my comments, so please keep everything respectful in the comments down below. And yeah, I will talk to you guys later. I'll try to cover more African American cases and more ethnic cases as I continue on with my channel. And like I said, I'm so sorry about this heavy case. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys in my next video. Bye guys!